IB Nation, welcome to a special edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's July 31st. That's Vince Siderio. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we were at practice today, Vince, and neither of us got sunburnt because we were only out there for about 25 minutes, which is good, about 30 minutes when you consider stretch. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of run through some of the observations we had today. We're not going to go as in-depth as we have in the past because we just didn't get to see as much today, but there was some good action in what we did see, Vince. And I want to dive into that. So you kind of spent a lot of time down on the individual side during the defensive practice. So did a lot of drills. Or again, as we last time, they don't show us a ton, so there's not a ton of observations we can make from the defense, but we will make some, and then we'll talk about the offense. The drills they do are just more, and it's just more we can kind of talk about from those, Vince. So you spent some time today talking about the defense, looking at the defensive backs. We had some concerns about the safeties playing the football in our last practice report. They were doing some more of that stuff today, Vince. Like you saw, let's talk about kind of the drill they were doing, and then who stood out to you, and just overall how the group performed today during the drills.
Yeah, so the drill was a little bit different than last time. So a couple of days ago they were inside because it was raining, and basically it was a very simple back pedal and start heading either to the right or to the left, but straight back. There was no reading and reacting. It was, hey, this is going to be a long ball, either to my right or my left. Track the ball, high point it, grab it, go get it, right? So it was not a simple drill, but it was a very basic drill, right? So this time they kind of upped the ante a little bit for the safeties. So the safeties would get into their drop. There would be 4 different locations where the ball could go. Front right, front left, back right, back left, right? And so they had to read the quarterback. And so Coach O'Leary was the one throwing the ball, and so he would be in a very neutral position, and then he would change his body. He would point one direction or the other, and then throw the ball, and then the safeties would have to make a play on it. Pretty simple stuff, but it is like it's the next step in the maturation process of this drill, essentially, right? And this time it was outside, and I know that doesn't sound like that's a big difference or a big deal, but it was, because guys were not having an issue this time around tracking the football when it was in the air. I truly think, because there were some guys that looked very kind of silly out there trying to track balls the first time a couple of days ago. I think they were losing the ball in the rafters. I really do, because first of all, not often is a ball put that high unless you're catching a punt. Okay, and so they were losing the ball, especially the younger guys who aren't used to playing in the indoor facility that Notre Dame has. Well, this time they were outside, and I saw no issues tracking the ball. Like, that was not an issue for anybody all the way down the depth chart. So that's a big difference, first of all. One of the guys that was having a bit of an issue last time around from the safety position was true freshman Ben Minnick. This time it was a completely different guy. I mean, he was high pointing the ball. He was tracking it very, very nicely. Like, there was no
He's really smooth,
whatsoever.
Vince. He's a really smooth and fluid
Which
athlete.
is what worried me last time. I was like, this is the guy you were talking about? Like,
well, and different from what we saw in the spring, just how well he moved around in the spring too. But yeah,
absolutely. So much better tracking the ball, much better getting to where he needed to be. I thought he did a really good job of reading the quarterback, getting downhill when he needed to get downhill. Very impressed, by the way, and again, this is kind of a top to bottom thing, with the hands of the safeties. Like, they were stealing the ball from the guys that they had in the 4 spot, because they actually had guys standing there. So a guy would run a rep, and then he would stay wherever he ended up, and then that guy would go to the back of the line, that kind of a thing. So there were guys there ready to catch the ball. Now, they were just standing there. They weren't coming back to the ball or doing what receivers do, but they were standing there getting ready to catch the ball. The safeties were doing a great job with their hands, like catching the ball and going the other direction, like full extension, like catching the ball, not like catching it with your chest, that kind of a thing, because Chris O'Leary does a really good job. He's got a bit of a gun too, by the way.
He's got a little bit of a throwing hose. There's no doubt about that.
So he was putting it on those guys and making the safeties work to get to the ball. And then not only did they sometimes not catch it, but that was because there was no way they were going to get to the ball, but they were knocking it down and they were making a play on the football, which was huge. Obviously, Xavier Watts looked amazing in this drill. This drill really kind of highlights what he does well. He breaks on the ball really, really well. His hands are really, really good. I never saw a ball hit the ground when the ball was going towards him. So good stuff there. So from the safeties, I would say I was very, very impressed. Much bigger step in a positive direction from what we saw inside the other day. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are outside. They're able to see the ball. It was a nice sunny day, that kind of a thing. So really impressed with the safety play, Brian.
Corners, Vince, obviously you got a chance to see the corners going through some drills. Most
Mm-hmm.
of the time was spent watching the veterans. I think the thing that we'll say is kind of briefly, because look, if a scholarship cornerback at Notre Dame doesn't look good going through a pedal drill, there's a big problem. So we don't need to spend a lot of time on that.
Right.
But I will say this: one of the questions that we had about this team is look, anytime you have a guy that's a really good player, the question is, does he stay hungry? Does he continue to work to get better? And those type of things. And both Cam Hart, we've talked about Jaden Mickey's having a really good fall camp so far, had a good spring, but Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart have both come into fall camp locked in. They look quicker, they look stronger, and
there's a confidence, there's an air about that position group as a whole, but definitely the top level guys, and obviously that feeds into the rest of the depth chart, which I think is an important point to make. Those guys look locked in, man. And from just a physical standpoint, like what they look like, you brought up Jaden Mickey. I thought he just looks more filled out this year than he did, obviously, as a true freshman. He's in the back end of his freshman year, but he's been here since last spring. He just looks like more of a man out there. You know what I mean? He just looks more physically put together, a little bit more armor, as they say. So I think he's going to be able to compete more. And the same thing with Benjamin Morrison. Like, they just look more physically mature than they looked this time last year. And I really, Benjamin Morrison was like in his first week of camp this time last year, but they just look more physically mature. They look like they're going to be able to handle the rigors of, 13 to 14 game season. That was very noticeable because this is the first time that I've really been kind of on top of those guys, watching them do drill work. I was, 10 yards away from them, 10, 15 yards away from them. So their physical maturity really stood out to me today. Same thing with Cam Hart, to be honest with you. He just looks more chiseled, more put together than he has in the past as well.
We'll talk a little about Cam here in a second here, because there's one area that he's really been good so far in fall camp. Defensively, Vince, D-line, we don't see a ton. We did get to see them running through some bag drills. Jason Onye is really quick vertically. I think Gabriel Rubio is moving around a whole lot better this year than he did last year. He just seems to have a little bit more burst in the drills that we've seen. The freshmen are still just trying to find their way. That's really the big thing with them, is they're just trying to find their way. And it's early for them. But I thought Brennan Vernon moved around a little bit better today than we saw in earlier practices, just had a little bit more of confidence in what he was doing. And looking at the others too, obviously Josh Burnham athletically looks really good. Jordan Pizarro looks good. So they're going through bag drills. It's kind of one of those things where, if a guy doesn't look good going through this kind of drill, then he probably shouldn't be on scholarship at Notre Dame. The other guy that I thought that I've noticed this a couple times, Vince, and we haven't talked a lot about, is Aiden Kanahana. He's still big. He's still a 300-plus pounder, but he's just carrying the weight a little bit better, it seems. He's moving a little bit cleaner, I noticed, in some of the drills.
Sure.
And that's a good thing, because I think they could use him this year to kind of fill some of that a little bit of that Chris Smith role from last year, and now he's healthy.
Gotcha.
He's now a year and 4 months removed from the knee surgery he had last spring. So that's a good thing. And the Donovan Heinisch is a really twitchy dude. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch him yet, Vince. I'll have you watch him at the next availability. That is a twitchy kid, really twitchy kid. So those are some things we saw from their linebackers. Were just working on the sleds and tackling again.
They were doing the single sled. They would push it up, and then they would go and get that rolling dummy deal.
I will say this, Vince. The linebackers are working a lot on footwork, proper angles. Today the one drill they were doing differently today that was different from what they've done in the past. Everything they've been doing a lot of tackling and stepping down and footwork. Today they were actually working on proper pass drop angles.
Okay,
so we saw that, and that this is the first time I've really seen Maris Luafau kind of open up, and he was moving really crisp. Now I have no clue if he was doing the right thing because they were kind of far away, so we couldn't hear the coaching instructions. So I can only evaluate the way in which he moved. So that was a positive to seeing how well he moved around. He is quicker this year. Now we just need to see if he can be assignment correct and all that, but he's definitely moving well. And all of them look, I mean, it's an athletic group of linebackers. There's no doubt
For
about
sure.
that. So that's kind of the other stuff that we saw from the defense. Let's talk a little offense, Vince. We had a chance to watch
Please.
some of the offense. We'll go skill players first, and then we'll finish
Okay.
up with the offensive linemen because I spent a lot of my day. So where I was situated in practice, I kind of found this really good sweet spot, Vince, where I was behind in the end zone on the offensive
Mhm.
field, but I could see the linebackers here, the D line here, the receivers were behind them, and the running backs were over here, and then the
Right.
linemen. So I was like, okay, this is the sweet spot, right? I found the sweet spot, and there's a couple Miami Dolphin scouts there as well today,
But
which
was
is
it in
pretty
the
cool.
shade? That's the key.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not soft, right? It's football, baby. You know what I'm saying? So, I almost did a scene from Rush Hour. I'm no punk, but you've heard me do that one with you before. Thank you, my dear. So, skill player wise, we'll talk
Yeah.
a little about what we saw today. Obviously, the running backs continue to work through. They're impressive in drills, things along those lines. Jabron Payne is really having an impressive camp, just moving around wise. I don't know what he's doing in team stuff because we
Right.
don't get to see it, but just moving around. And Jadarian Price is starting to get more and more comfortable. You could see that going through drills, Vince. He's starting to get more and more confidence in that Achilles and just really planting off. He had probably the play of the day during practice today. So we explained to y'all last week the drill where there's like 4 quarterbacks going at a time and then 5 guys running a route, and then they've got that assistant coach with the hose just throwing the ball back there
It's
too.
like it's organized chaos is what it is.
Yes. And usually they're pretty good. But today, early in the rep, I think it was like the 3rd rep or so, one of the quarterbacks made a mistake, and they both threw to Jadarian. So if
Oh,
you're on the board, if you're on the message board, or actually it's also in the story I put on the front page, but I put a picture. Angela got a great picture of it. So what happens is he's running just a little check out cut, to the left, and the one quarterback throws in the ball and he catches it. But as he catches the one ball, he sees that the other quarterback has also thrown a ball at him. So he tucks the ball and he reaches his left hand out and snatches the other ball out of the air. It was not like sometimes you'll do that, Vince. Like you'll do different things to kind of just focus on concentration. It's not an applicable drill to a game, but it's just about you want to put him in an uncomfortable
right.
spot and just work on concentration. So he tucks the one ball, and Angela has the picture where he's like literally puts his hands on the football and catches it. It's in the practice report. And he tucks it away and he catches both. And of course, the players are going crazy, like, great job, JD, and all that kind of stuff. But it was a really impressive catch.
That's hilarious.
He's catching the ball really well. All the running backs, Vince, that first
Really
day there
good
was a couple
hands.
drops. But since then they catch the ball really clean,
Yeah.
man. Like all of
Yeah.
them, Audric, all the way down to Jeremiah Love and everybody in between. They catch the ball really, really well. And they continue to do a lot of different things with them in the pass game. Like a lot of things with them in the pass game.
Yep.
Which I like. They don't, because like during these routes on air, they're never just having the backs do simple checkdowns.
Right.
Which I always hated when they would do that. Like have them run one of your route
It's
combinations.
a waste of time
use,
the way
right?
they used to do it. Yeah.
And so they're not doing that now. They're running all their routes that they'll run as part of their package. And so we saw that today, and they're tracking the ball very well. You had an interesting observation, Vince, that that you pointed out to me, and then I kind of noticed it too.
Yeah.
That Sam Hartman is a guy that loves to spread the ball around, but there's one guy that he is really working on making sure that when it's time to throw a deep ball, he gets a chance to chuck it. Share that story with me.
Yeah.
Vince.
So I was just kind of watching, and I was watching because normally, so here's how it works. So there's the 4 quarterbacks, and they literally all stand in a line, and then the ball just comes out to the 4 different receivers that they're throwing to. And then after each rep, they basically all shift down one, and then the guy in the end comes back over to the other side. Awesome. That it's just a constant kind of a merry-go-round of quarterbacks, so they all get to throw the different routes. Well, what I started to notice is obviously they had the first team skill guys going first, right, on the first rep, and then they would work their way down the depth chart. Well, every time the first team guys would get up for the first rep, Hartman would make sure that he was in the slot, well, pun intended, he was in the spot that would throw to Chris Tyree. Now, Chris Tyree, during this routes on air period, was always running like a deep corner, a fade, something along the sideline that's deep. Like he was always running down the field. And Hartman was making sure that on that rep, he was the one throwing to Chris Tyree. There are many reasons why this could be the case, Brian. Number one, he liked to throw to a fast guy, and it's fun, and he didn't drop a single pass, and they were always put like right here, which was fantastic. Number two, he just wants to make sure that relationship is really, really good, because Sam Hartman's not an idiot. He's a sixth-year quarterback. He knows the kind of burst and speed that Chris Tyree has. He's going to be open, people, okay? He's going to be open, and Sam Hartman is going to want to let it rip. He clearly loves throwing the deep ball. We've seen it in games. We've seen it in practice. He wants to throw the deep ball. He found his deep ball guy, let me tell you, or at least right now. He's going to let it rip to whoever. I'm not worried about that part, but he is establishing a relationship with Chris Tyree, man, and it's just so much fun to watch, Brian. It's so much fun to watch.
I'm very curious to see how, to hear the reason why, because we know he spent a lot of time this spring working on Tobias and Dion in that regard. Part of me wonders if, since now that Notre Dame's kind of amping up how they're using Chris Tyree, if this is not a concerted thing from the staff to say, hey, look, we need you and Chris to make sure that because that's the one thing we didn't see a lot from Chris Tyree in the spring. We saw him catching slants and just outrunning people. We're catching crosses and outrunning people.
Right, using his speed to their advantage.
Yeah. And then it wasn't as crisp over the middle and on some of the deeper stuff. He did have a really nice deep catch in a one-on-one against JD Bertrand in the Jersey scrimmage, which we saw them when they put the highlights on Twitter. Saw that on Twitter. Part of me wonders if this is like a concerted effort to say, hey, look, we got to make sure he's on the same page with all these guys. And so
it could be.
Saw that a lot. But this is now the third time we've been at a practice we have observed, man, he really likes to throw to Chris Tyree a lot, which is interesting. Very, very interesting.
Yes, it is. Yes,
so the other quarterbacks I thought today, Vince, were inconsistent.
Yeah,
look like young guys. Some really nice throws, a couple inconsistent throws. I mean, nothing to be worried about. Just missing here, a little bit here, a little bit there.
And it was early in practice. I mean, but it is what it is. I mean, that's what we get to see. So that's what we report on.
Freshman Braylon James made a great catch today during the RVA. He snatched was about 3 inches off the ground, and he went down and got it. But instead of going down and catch it and then kind of rolling underneath it, he caught it, lifted it up, got his balance back, and ran vertically. It's one of those plays you look at and you're like, that maybe might not look impressive to somebody, but when you really understand the balance it requires to stay up after making that kind of catch, you're like, okay. And then to catch, I mean, he really snatched it 3 inches off the ground. Really impressive catch. Rico Flores had a really nice catch in one-on-ones as we were walking out. Jaden Greathouse, man, that's an impressive football player, Vince. He's going to play a bunch this year. I just don't see how he doesn't.
Yeah.
I would argue this from what we see in one-on-ones, right? I don't know what it looks like in team. He may get to team and just not apply any of this. I don't know. I'm just telling you from what we see in the one-on-one periods. He's their most impressive route runner. And he's not doing it to the freshmen and the walk-ons. A lot of times with the freshmen, they're going against other freshmen and maybe some walk-ons. He's doing this to veterans. He completely just destroyed Ramon Henderson in the one full practice we saw. We talked about that with a route technique, and he did it to Xavier Watts today. Won't necessarily describe the specific route, but it's kind of working vertically, and then he's got it. So he's got to do a proper release angle, and then he's got to get to the top end and then slam it 1-2 and then work out. His footwork efficiency and ability to get quickly into and out of his top ends on stop routes like that, all vertical releases, is really impressive. Really impressive. He went against Xavier Watts, who we have praised for how well he's looked athletically. And honestly, Vince, when I'm watching the route, I don't know what Xavier Watts could have done about it. I mean, it was just, unless you'd have told him, hey, here's the route that's coming, I don't know what Xavier could have done. It was that good of a route. And then the ball came to him. It was a second late. I think it was might have been Angeli that threw it. It was a second late, but he was open. It got there, and he made an impressive grab. He's such an impressive route runner, and he's so confident. This freshman class is even Braylon James, who needs a ton of work, technically, a ton of work. He's a confident kid, and you need that. I like that. That's a compliment. These three freshmen are very, very confident. The other thing too, Vince, we didn't talk about with Chris Tyree, he's catching the deep ball with a lot more confidence than we saw in the spring. I mean, tracking it, like dropping it, tear dropping it. We talked about the one he did last week on on an over route. Today he did it on a deeper route. So actually it was actually a mistake by Tyree. Hartman threw the ball where it was supposed to be, but Chris just kind of faded a little bit too much outside on the release. So instead of catching it here, it like dropped right over top of him.
Those are the hardest ones
to catch.
Yeah, it's really difficult to catch
and
those.
He caught it clean.
Yeah,
Caught a corner route from Steve Angeli, threw him a really nice corner route. Just dropped it over. He made it, but he's not like catching it here, Vince. He's like catching it here, which is where you want, with his hands. And so that was an impressive thing. I thought Tobias Merriweather looks really clean athletically. His routes are improving. He's beating the veteran receiver. Here's the thing, Vince, about Tobias. So we're going to talk about this route. He's beating the two starters with his routes. He's getting open. I would say, like, when I say beating, I'm talking about as much as you can beat a Cam Hart and a Benjamin Morrison. So today he's running a vertical route, and it's probably from about 35, 40 in, maybe.
Yeah.
Was where it was.
Yeah.
And
there was some height on the ball. Like it was
his release against Cam Hart's really good. He gets a step on Cam. Coach Mickens is trying to tell him to close off, but he couldn't really close off because Tobias had a step on him. And the ball was underthrown. If the ball's thrown outside, Sam Hartman waited too long to let rid of the ball, because you had said it was Sam that threw the ball. It was late getting rid of the football. If he releases it on time, he drops it over the shoulder. It's touchdown. I mean, he had a step on Cam, but the ball was underthrown. Tobias did a great job working back to it, got his hands on it, and then Cam Hart knocked it out again. So it's one of those ones where you got to properly explain this one for people to understand it. Because the easy takeaway is, well, yeah, Cam just, he doesn't make that play.
Right.
Okay. Partly true. Cam's got to do a better job of really squeezing that ball and really making that catch, be stronger. A sophomore going against a fifth-year senior. Well, you could say, well, this is the grown man strength. Well, that's the same thing happened against Benjamin Morrison and sophomore on sophomore. So he's got to do a better job of bringing those in.
Sure.
At the same time, that was a heck of a play by Cam Hart.
Yeah.
I mean, he was beat to get his hands on the football, knock it out, to come back and play, and also to not interfere with Tobias when he was coming back to the football. And that was a bit of a knock that we had on Cam Hart last year, was he didn't play the deep ball really well, and he's doing a little better job with that. But those Tobias versus Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart battles that right now Tobias isn't winning enough of them are going to make him so much better. So there's really two ways you can put on it, Vince. As a former receivers coach, I'm telling you, I'm digging this battle, because yes, you got to do better. But in most teams I've coached on, I never had corners good enough to make my receivers have to work that way. Ever.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, we were just beating them all the time. And
if it was lesser,
coached,
go ahead. If it was
Vince.
lesser corners, I was just going to say, if it was lesser corners, he'd be mossing guys all day. Like
both times.
It wouldn't even be like, we'd all be like, oh, Tobias is, right. But yeah, the battle is just, it's so good.
I've only ever had one team where I coached where we had a corner who was that good. And this was a kid who got invited to camp with the Chiefs, right? I mean, it just doesn't happen very often. And so it's just kind of like, you can spin it to, well, Tobias isn't making plays. It's a concern area. And yeah, he's got to make some of those plays. Number one, we've seen one part of team practice. They've had 5 practices. We've seen 1 7-on-7 or team period. That's it. We don't know what these guys are doing in team and 7-on-7. We have no clue. It could be more of the same. But what I will say is that he's getting open, and he has made a couple of these grabs. I mean, he did beat Cam twice for touchdowns in the one full practice that we saw. But he's got to make these grabs. But we also have to be willing to look at and say, Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart both times made plays on the ball. These aren't Tobias dropping the football.
Right.
These are him catching the ball and then them knocking it out. So he's got to do a better job of catching it. Unlike the last one where he needs to catch and keep it high, there's nothing he could have done except just be stronger on the ball.
Right.
Because the ball was behind him and it was kind of here as opposed to here, and you're not high pointing Cam Hart. He's almost as tall as you. He's every bit as long as you. Right. It's just a different kind of deal. And the ball was underthrown, not thrown high like the one in the red zone last time. So that's just something where if Tobias keeps working at this is going to end up being a great thing for him that he's going against these guys, because if he can start beating them more consistently,
right.
There's nobody on the schedule that's going to be better. Like,
exactly.
this has not been the case for a long time. With all due respect to Ohio State's corners and Clemson's corners and some of these other teams in the corners that people talk about, there's not a better cornerback
No.
tandem that Tobias Merriweather is going to face this year than the one he's doing every single day in fall camp.
Exactly.
And that's a very good thing.
Yep.
Very good.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, there's no quit in these corners, man. Like they could have easily been like, oh, he caught it over me, it's game over. But they don't stop until the whistle, man. Like they're getting their hands in there, they're trying to punch it out. Like they're going all the way until the ball is either caught on the ground or on the ground. Like that, there is no quit in these corners, man. And I'm telling you, they're going to be making plays all year long. There's just no doubt in my mind. They're going to make plays all year long.
Yeah. So that's it from today's practice, Vince, and we will have more. I know we'll have more. We'll have practice access tomorrow as well. We'll get a chance to see a little bit more tomorrow. We'll focus on different parts of the team. We're also going to have a recruiting show today, Notre Dame Recruiting Hour, that Vince and Ryan Roberts will be a part of. We have IB Nation Sports Talk tonight at 6 o'clock. You can check that out as well. If you have not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Vince, we are about 20 people away. We had a really big weekend. I've already kind of the people who have got our numbers where we need to be. We're about 20, not including the ones we've had sign up today. So we're about 20 away from reaching our preseason goals. So definitely help us get there. Sign up for a monthly membership, annual membership, or you can join the IB Booster Club. And if you join those, you get some really cool IB merch from that as well. So make sure you check that out. So for Vince, I'm Brian. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.